I was looking at our electricity bill on the kitchen table. The number was higher than last month, and I found myself staring at it longer than usual. A few weeks earlier, things had started to feel steadier. Our small savings were growing, and for a moment I felt a little relief before the season changed. Then new expenses began to appear. Cooling costs, school break needs, and another rise in fuel prices quietly arrived one after another. I started asking myself the same question again. Why does every bit of breathing room seem to shrink whenever life begins to feel easier? My name is Clara, and for years I believed our problem was simply not having enough money. Then I began to notice there might be something else behind it. I made my morning coffee while a weekly grocery list rested beside the cup. As I looked over the numbers again, I quietly recalculated our budget. While Armand was getting ready for work, I showed him the latest electricity bill. He nodded quietly and reminded me that summer always seemed to bring higher costs. I opened our banking app and checked the balance again. The numbers looked fine, yet the feeling of ease never quite arrived. Myra sat at the dining table drawing without a hurry. Beside her, I recorded this month's expenses, and her pencils seemed far more relaxed than my thoughts. Later that afternoon, an advertisement for school supplies caught my attention. Summer was not even over yet, but the next season's spending was already being introduced. I set my phone down and sat quietly for a moment. There was a kind of tiredness that came from feeling the next expense waiting somewhere ahead. Outside, everything looked completely ordinary. Inside my head, the list of upcoming costs had already started moving through the months ahead. That evening, I opened old budget notes and spread them across the dining table. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, only that I wanted to understand something I had been noticing. Summer expenses appeared first in the records. Higher electricity bills, Myra's activities, and rising fuel costs were all sitting on the same page. Then I reached the fall entries. School supplies, new shoes, and extracurricular costs filled another familiar section. Winter brought its own set of expenses. Heating costs, holiday gifts, and family travel appeared exactly where I expected them. As I moved through the records, a pattern slowly became harder to ignore. It wasn't happening once or twice, it was showing up every year. What surprised me wasn't the amount of money involved, it was how consistently the same pattern kept returning. Yet somehow, each year we reacted as if none of it had been expected. Looking at the notes, that felt strangely familiar. I showed the notes to Armand and slid the pages across the table. We sat side by side, looking at the same numbers in quiet concentration. "This always happens, doesn't it?" I said quietly while tracing a line across the page. Armand simply nodded as we continued looking at the pattern. As I sat there, a different thought began to form. The seasons were not the problem, because they always arrived when expected. Another realization followed right behind it. We were the ones hoping each season would somehow be different. That realization left me slightly uncomfortable. The pattern had been visible all along if I had taken the time to notice it. We were not dealing with an emergency. We were looking at something that had already been marked on the calendar long before it arrived. For the first time, the difference between those two things felt clear to me. I sat quietly with that thought and looked at the page one more time. It was a quiet Sunday at the park. Mira ran after drifting soap bubbles, while Armin laughed beside her. I smiled along with them. Even so, part of my mind was still sitting with the household expense list. While sitting there, I was already calculating the next season. The numbers returned to my thoughts without being invited. I disliked how often I did that, yet I did not know how to stop my thoughts from moving ahead. Every season seemed to arrive with a different test, and I always felt a little less prepared than I wanted to be. Our home was doing fine. Our family was doing fine. Still, that sense of caution never completely left me. I slowly realized the thing that felt tired was not our bank account. The part growing weary was my own mind. One evening, I sat at the dining table, marking dates on a calendar. A few important days were slowly filling the blank spaces ahead. Myra sat beside me and watched quietly. Her curiosity lingered on every mark I made. "What are you doing, Mom?" she asked. I smiled and told her I was making a plan. She pointed to August of the following year. To her, that month stood out immediately. "That's when school starts again, right?" she said. Then she casually added that they would buy a new school bag. I paused for a moment after hearing that. For Mira, it was simply something that would happen when the time came. As I looked at the dates, a question settled in my mind. Why did I keep treating something certain to arrive as if it were a surprise every time? That evening, I stayed at the dining table long after everyone had gone to bed. Mira's simple question kept returning to my mind in the quiet of the house. School supplies, summer expenses, holiday celebrations, and heating bills all drifted through my thoughts. Each one felt connected, even though they belonged to different times of the year. The more I thought about them, the clearer one thing became. These costs were not surprises waiting to happen. They arrived every year. I started noticing a pattern in how I handled these moments. I often waited until an expense arrived, then tried to catch up afterward. Yet many of those expenses had been visible long before they arrived. Somehow, I had never really made space for them. Sitting there, I found myself looking at financial calm a little differently. It seemed less connected to having more money and more connected to making room for what was ahead. I sat quietly for a moment, letting that thought settle. Maybe that missing space had been what I was searching for all along. After Mira fell asleep, I sat with Armand in the living room. The house was quiet, and we stayed there for a moment without saying much. I finally said what had been sitting in my mind for a long time. I told him I was tired of always feeling surprised by the same things. Armand nodded quietly after hearing me. Then he admitted that he felt the same way too. For the first time, we were not talking about numbers. The conversation stayed on how everything had been feeling lately. The feeling was always catching up to us. It never seemed ready, and it always felt one step behind. Then we started making a list together. We went through each season one at a time. We were not making the list because we feared those seasons. We simply wanted to greet each one with a little more calm. The following week, we added a few new categories to our budget. Small labels like Summer Fund, Back to School Fund, and Holiday Fund started appearing on the page. The amounts were modest and easy to overlook. Nothing about our daily life changed overnight. Even so, a little money found its way into those categories each month. The progress was quiet and gradual. I started picking up a few things during sales. They were bought long before the season actually arrived. I also stopped feeling guilty about not following every seasonal trend. Some things simply stayed off my list. I realized many family traditions did not require much money. What mattered most was simply being together. For the first time, the next season did not feel intimidating. I looked ahead with a calmer mind than before. I learned that not every financial strain arrives unexpectedly. Some of it returns at the same time every year, quietly following a familiar pattern. When we start preparing earlier, it feels like we are setting aside a little more peace for the future. It is not only about the money itself. Our home did not suddenly become perfect. The bills are still there, and the expenses still arrive as they always have. But I no longer feel like every season is something to fight against. If stories like this accompany your own family journey, I would be happy to have you join Clara's family journal. Now I find myself wondering about other families. Which season puts the most pressure on your budget, and what yearly expense is the hardest to prepare for?